King Herod paced his throne room. His boots clicked against the marble floor, a rhythmic, hollow sound in the dead of night. He stopped at the window, staring into the dark horizon. He did not fear the clash of swords or the weight of shields. He feared a child. His grip tightened on the stone sill until his knuckles turned white. He looked at the shadows stretching across the floor, sensing his power fraying at the edges. Miles away, in the far east, the world shifted. 3 travelers stood under a sky that had suddenly ignited. A new star burned with a piercing silver light, cutting through the blackness of the heavens. They packed their bags, saddled their camels, and turned their faces toward the horizon. They did not look back. They moved across shifting desert dunes and climbed jagged mountain ranges, their path dictated entirely by the light above. While the king paced in his silent, cold halls, the travelers pushed forward. The distance was vast, the terrain unforgiving, but they walked with the momentum of a promise being kept. The star stayed fixed, a silent beacon pulling them toward a destiny that the king in his palace could not yet comprehend. The heavy gates of Jerusalem groaned open. 3 figures moved through the streets, their presence drawing eyes from every window. They walked straight to the palace, ignoring the merchants and the guards. "Where is the newborn king of the Jews?" they asked. The sound of their voices echoed against the stone walls, and then the city went quiet. Activity ceased. The guards at the palace doors leaned in, whispering the news into the dark corridors. Inside, Herod heard the question. He stopped his pacing. His hand tightened around his scepter until the metal bit into his skin. He stood still, took a breath, and smoothed his face into a mask of calm. He summoned his advisors, his movements deliberate and slow. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but he kept his trembling hands tucked firmly behind his back. "Find this child," he commanded, his lips curling into a thin, forced smile. "Search the hills and the fields. Bring me word when you find him, so that I may also go and pay my respects." He played the role of a seeker, but his eyes darted toward his soldiers, calculating the distance between his throne and a cradle. The journey ended not in a throne room, but in a structure of rough timber and straw. The travelers stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of dry grass and livestock. There, they found the child. They did not bow to the grandeur of the palace, nor did they seek a king of stone and gold. They knelt in the dirt, their movements slow and reverent. They opened their chests, placing treasures of incense and spice before the child. In that moment, the world of the palace ceased to exist for them. Back in Jerusalem, the silence in the throne room grew heavy. Herod sat on his dais, eyes fixed on the map of Bethlehem, waiting for the messengers to return. Each minute that passed felt like a crack in the foundation of his rule. He watched the shadows lengthen across the marble. No word came. No soldiers returned with news. The realization settled in his chest, turning his calculated deception into a freezing, sharp rage. He gripped the arms of his throne until his fingers ached. He had gold, he had legions, and he had walls that scraped the sky, yet he was losing his hold on the world. The target of his fear was not a soldier with a blade, but a promise he could not reach. Herod did not wait for the sun to rise. He gestured to the captains, his hand a blur of motion. "Go," he hissed. The palace courtyard filled with the clatter of iron and the frantic rhythm of hooves. Soldiers thundered out through the gates, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning every path toward the hills. They tore through the outskirts, turning over carts, searching the brush, and demanding answers from the terrified villagers. But the trails were cold. The paths were empty. The child had slipped through the net like smoke in a gale. Hours later, the clatter returned to the palace, but it lacked the urgency of the departure. The soldiers dismounted, their heads bowed, their hands empty of any captive. They walked into the hall, the sound of their boots scraping against the marble, and reported their failure in hushed, jagged tones. Herod did not scream. He did not order their execution. He simply watched them turn and retreat, leaving him in the center of the vast, silent hall. The echoes of his own breathing filled the space. He looked at his hands, then at the empty throne. The absolute power he had wielded for decades felt thin, like parchment held to a flame. The child was gone, and with him, the grip Herod had once held over the future. Seasons turned into decades. The marble that once echoed with the frantic pace of a king began to crack under the weight of the sun. Rain seeped into the grout, widening the fissures. The palace walls, once thought invincible, surrendered their height to the wind. Stone by stone, the fortress collapsed into the dust of the desert floor. The names of the soldiers and the decrees of the throne vanished into the shifting sands. Empires that boasted of eternity were erased by the patient march of time. Yet, the story of the child remained. It traveled through the mouths of those who had nothing, outlasting the empires that tried to bury it. It was a promise that defied the reach of iron and the arrogance of crowns. The most powerful man in the nation had pitted his sword against a single, quiet truth. And the sword had shattered. History remembers the dust of the throne, but it still speaks the name of the child. No king, no matter how great, can halt the work of what is written in the stars. The silence of the desert is the only testament left of the man who thought he could stop a promise.